So I recently spent a whole lot of time sitting in bed watching German TV shows to make my top 8 German TV shows video for you. Now, as soon as I uploaded that, I got people asking me about doing the same sort of thing for films. So I was right back to the coalface like the dedicated YouTuber I am. I know it's a tough life being a YouTuber, but somebody has to do it, right? Without any further ado, here are some great films that I wanted to share with you guys. Okay, I'm going to start with one of my absolute all-time favorite German films here, which is Oh Boy, and the English title of it is A Coffee in Berlin. Now this stars everybody's favourite in every German film at the moment person, Tom Schilling. And it follows a day in his life as he basically tries to get a coffee and, well, tries to achieve a lot of things. Everything that can go wrong does go wrong, and it's a really, really funny film. But the way that it's structured is kind of like lots of little individual stories. It definitely feels like a series of short films almost. And this format means that they can explore Berlin in a really interesting way by showing little vignettes from every different angle. So there's the hyper cool let's all move to Berlin club scene. But then right at the end, in the absolute highlight of the film for me, he goes into a pub and asks for his final cup of coffee, and their coffee machine is broken. And he starts speaking to this old man sitting next to him who was present in Berlin during Kristallnacht. So you've got so many different angles on the city, and I think it's a really, really great film. Okay, so speaking of National Socialism, I guess, let's do number 2 on my list, which is ist wieder da, or Look Who's Back is the English title. Now this is a very strange film, the premise of which is that Hitler has come back to life. And people who meet him think that he is just an incredibly committed performance artist who just never breaks character, but in reality, he is Hitler back from the dead in modern day Germany, trying to establish himself again. Now, if that concept has immediately turned you off, then please bear with me for a moment, because I think it's a really interesting film. It's part scripted, but it's also partly just taking this character and putting them in the real world with sort of hidden cameras kind of thing. In the same way that the film Borat used this outrageous character to shine a light on modern America, this film uses Hitler, outrageous character, to shine a light on right-wing ideas and how they can be stoked back up into the public consciousness with just a little push. Okay, let's go a little bit further back in time now and look at M, sometimes called M, eine Stadt sucht einen Mörder. So M follows a group of Berlin residents as they try and track down a serial killer of children who has been plaguing the city for some months as the film begins. The film is equal parts scary, exciting, intriguing, mysterious, but it's also quite funny. There's a lot of black comedy going on in here, as well as interesting social commentary, the idea of honor amongst the idea of honor amongst thieves, and also ideas about mental health. You have really interesting narrative devices, really interesting placement of the camera and things like that, stuff that you just wouldn't see in a modern film, which makes it quite an interesting academic watch as well as just an entertaining story. One disadvantage though is that the German is a little bit old-fashioned and sometimes slightly hard to follow. I definitely had to rely quite a bit on the German subtitles that I had rather than just listening to it. So maybe want to wait a couple of films before you move into M. But let's stay in black and white for a moment and talk about Himmel, über Berlin, or Wings of Desire? Yeah, Wings of Desire, which is the English title. So the premise of this is that there are invisible angel-like characters who watch over and guard human beings and help them in times of distress. But one of these angels, through the course of his work in the city, falls in love with a mortal woman and over time decides that he wants to become mortal too. So reasonably early on in the film, he decides to cast aside his angelicness and become mortal and start to explore the city. It's told very poetically. In fact, there is a lot of poetry in it. A lot of the plot was inspired by this one particular poem that you hear over and over again in the film. But it can be a little bit tricky to follow. So this is another one where you may need to rely on the subtitles a little bit more, but it is definitely worth it. It's really interesting and a total classic of German cinema. Okay, next up is Das Leben der Anderen, or The Lives of Others. Now, you have almost certainly heard of this film, so it definitely breaks my rule for this video. But I absolutely love this film, and if I'm making a video recommending German films for you, I just felt obliged. I felt like I had to include it, even if it didn't count. Specifically, we follow a Stasi spy as they are installed in the attic above the flat of an intellectual, a playwright. And their job is to spy on this person and understand what they're doing. Now, there are so many different layers in the plot and so many different things going on, so I don't want to spoil anything, but needless to say that there is a whole lot that goes on from that initial setup, and it is an incredible story. What I can say though is that it is really well regarded as having portrayed an incredibly accurate picture of what life was like in East Germany at that time. It's a really interesting film just from that perspective. But as well as all that, it is an incredible and, yes, emotional film as well. It's particularly at the end where I think I had a bit of a weep. It is very, very good, and I would highly recommend that one. You may have noticed, by the way, that so far in this list we've covered a couple of things to do with National Socialism and a couple of things to do with the Cold War, and they are recurring themes in German cinema, such that I have found anyway. And the last two on my list are no exception. The last two are both set in or direct consequences of the Second World War. The first one of these is called Else, hätte, Welt, verändert, or the much easier English title, 13 Minutes. This film tells the true story of a guy called Georg Else who attempted to blow up Hitler by planting a bomb in a beer hall where he was due to speak. The English title, 13 Minutes, refers to the fact that Hitler left the venue just 13 minutes before the bomb eventually exploded. Later that day, Else is arrested at the Swiss border, carrying designs for his bomb, as well as lots of other very suspicious things that he probably should have just thrown away, in my opinion. But regardless, he gets caught and taken in for interrogation, and that is where the story begins in this film. But what I like about this film is that in order to tell his story, you also necessarily have to tell the story of the rise of National Socialism in Germany. So there are scenes where you see him with his friends, and they're all members of a political party, but the Nazi party are sitting on the table next to them, celebrating the fact that they've just won the biggest party in the Bundestag. We then see political prisoners being taken. We then see a little bit later on people being forced to wear signs in town squares as punishments. And we're seeing all of this through the lens of Else, who is feeling hopeless and helpless and wants to do something, anything, to try and stop this rise to power and what he sees as an inevitable path towards war, which of course is the case. And as an aside here, by the way, this is why I really love learning languages, because this is a historical figure who I had no idea existed, and a time in history that I really want to understand more. So watching films in your target language is just something that I absolutely love. It has this incredible ability to teach you about the culture and the people of a country that you are interested in. But at the same time, you're picking up new words and new phrases, and you're getting stronger at that language, which means that you can then get better at watching films and consuming that media, which means that you learn more languages. And it's this incredible positive feedback loop that is really, really great. Okay, let's take a look at the last film in my list now, which is Nirgendwo in Afrika, or Nowhere in Africa. This is a true story about a Jewish family that managed to escape from Germany early and go down to Kenya to try and start a new life there in exile. And it follows them from initially arriving in Kenya and trying to survive and get by on this farm to the outbreak of World War II, at which point they get interned as enemy aliens and have to live in a sort of prisoner of war kind of camp kind of thing. A lot of its time is focused on the daughter trying to understand this new world, and it focuses a lot on her relationship with her father. And I almost wish that it was more like that, because unfortunately some of the plot threads that involve the mother I thought were a bit unnecessary, and you could probably trim 20 minutes out of that film if you really wanted to. But speaking of the kid, she is super cool. It's a very well written character, really well acted, completely adorable, and relevant to us, by the way, dear viewer. And by the end of the film, she speaks English, Swahili, and German, which is pretty cool and pretty enviable. Spoiler alert, by the way, I did Google Swahili after I'd finished watching the film and spent a bit of time on the Wikipedia grammar page for it, and it looks pretty cool. But I haven't booked a flight to Nairobi or anything quite yet, don't worry. So that's my list, or at least the end of part 1. I have literally another 16 films that I'd written down that I wanted to watch and include in this video, but nobody wants to watch a whole 25 minutes of me talking all at once. So what I think I will like to do is record a part 2 of this, or a part 3 or part 4, something like that. Hey, I'm all up for watching some films and writing it off as research for a YouTube video. That is fine by me. Anyway, I would love to hear what you guys thought about my choices, and I would love to get any recommendations that you might have for German films that I've missed. It would be great to watch them and great to throw them into the sequels to this. All right, remember, if you want to catch more of my videos, then check out my YouTube channel right here. I have an exciting announcement coming up about a new target language / web series that I'm going to start. More on that later, but for now, I wanted to let you know that I'm planning on starting a Patreon page to support that. So I would love to hear about what sort of tier benefits you guys would be interested in. Do let me know in the comments if you've got any ideas on that, and I will put in the description a little bit more about what that's all about.